Welcome to this episode of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security's The Future of Food in the Americas series. Few global challenges are as urgent or complex as food security. Ensuring that all people are food secure requires cooperation across economics and trade, infrastructure, natural resources, scientific research, technology, and more. Over the past 2 decades, the value of Latin America's agricultural exports rose 500% to $316 billion in 2022. The region is the source of more than 60% of the world's soybean trade, almost half its corn, and more than a quarter of its beef. And 3 out of 4 avocados come from Latin America, as does much of the world's coffee. Yet at the same time, about 28% of people in the region suffer from moderate or severe food insecurity. Although hunger was reduced by 50% from 1990 to 2015, the challenge will continue into the future. So the question becomes how Latin America and the Western Hemisphere's agri-food systems can meet the growing demand for food despite the ecological and economic constraints, as well as ensure a competitive edge relative to other world regions when it comes to productivity and efficiency. Today we will discuss how one organization championing this mission seeks to create solutions for a resilient and sustainable future. For this episode, I spoke with Dr. Lina Salazar, lead economist of the Rural Development, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, the #1 source of development financing for Latin America. This interview is part of our ongoing project supported by the Mosaic Company on food security in the Americas, bringing together leading experts from across the hemisphere. Well, Lina, thank you very much for joining us. We're excited to have you with us today. What are the most significant long-term challenges and opportunities facing Latin America for greater strategic hemisphere coordination with food security?
Well, first of all, Peter, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, talking about such an important topic for the region. Different countries face different challenges. For instance, in the Southern Cone or in the Caribbean, they have very different needs and different topics that need to be considered, and that challenges the coordination or the coordination strategies among the different countries. So that's one of the main challenges. Another challenge for coordination, I would say that is the short-term vision that sometimes is leading some of the countries in the region. For instance, what we have been able to identify in the region is that a lot of countries, they think about the issues of food security only when there is time of crisis. And this is a structural issue that needs to be taught, and it needs to be developed before we face a crisis, precisely because we don't want to get to that point. Another opportunity that I think is fundamental is how can we coordinate research and innovation strategies among the region. And precisely because we have very similar challenges and problems, then we can also try to identify possible lines of research in which countries can work together so we don't duplicate efforts and we can be more efficient in the use of resources and more effective in terms of adoption of technologies and development of different technologies.
How can Latin America improve its supply chain infrastructure to support the increased or more efficient transportation of goods, including agricultural goods?
Of course, I think investing in hard infrastructure is fundamental. Not only focusing on rural roads, which are key, but also on different ports and different types of modalities for transportation of agricultural goods and food. So this is on the hard part of infrastructure. Irrigation is also a very important investment in infrastructure that needs to be strengthened in the region to deal with climate variability and also to stabilize the supply of food. On the other hand, we also need to focus on soft infrastructure. And sometimes when we think about infrastructure, we're just looking at the big ports and the big airports and roads. But we also need context-specific infrastructure for farmers to be able to store their production, so silos and a cold chain. These are also key for the transportation and being able to reach to a valuable markets. Then we need this type of infrastructure that maybe is not the one that we think about as the top of our heads, as well as digitalization, technology. How can we use the big data and artificial intelligence to make these processes of transportation more efficient and the logistics of the of reaching the market more efficient for farmers, especially for small farmers. And finally, I would say we need to have a more transversal perspective on thinking that this infrastructure needs to be sustainable, because we need to deal with different challenges related with climate, and so reducing CO2 emissions and also using more energy efficient technologies, as well as also more resilient infrastructure. We can make sure that it's going to assure their sustainability in the long term, even under the presence of climate variability.
Let's stick with climate change for 1 minute. This is an enormous challenge for not just the hemisphere, of course, but for the world as a whole. So I think one of the basic questions that people who are interested in food security, interested in agriculture here in this hemisphere want to know is, in your opinion, how difficult will it be for the region, for the hemisphere, to adapt the agri-food sector in the face of these changing climate realities that we're facing now, today, and into the future?
It's a fundamental challenge that we need to address regardless, even if it's difficult or not. I don't think we have any other option. So now we are working at the Inter-American Development Bank on a flagship report on agricultural productivity, and we are assessing all the countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. And we found that most of the rigorous studies on climate are focused on 3 or even 2 countries, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. So what we've seen is that if most of the studies and analyses are focused in few countries, then politicians and policymakers, they are not going to have the tools to actually identify which policies are effective on addressing climate variability. I think that's a main issue that we need to address, is how can we provide the governments with the rigorous evidence for them to implement policies that are effective and they are efficient in the long term. If we want to address food insecurity in the context of climate variability, we need for institutions from different sectors to work together. So we need agriculture working with health and education and trade. And sometimes what we see is that governments work in silos. So agriculture works by itself, and environment by itself, and we need these institutional arrangements to be able to formalize this sharing of data, information with the meteorological institutions at the country level too. How can they actually inform the policies and the interventions by the sectors in the country? So information is key if we want to move forward and to implement policies that will allow us to address climate variability.
How do you see sort of the innovation ecosystem across the region, and how is it positioned well to address the production of new and emerging technologies that we're going to need if we're going to maintain agricultural productivity, as well as addressing all these other challenges that we know are going to exist into the future, including but not limited to climate change? Most
of the countries in the region, they invest less than 1% of the agricultural GDP in research and development. 1% is like the international standard for investing in research and development in agriculture. And this already tells us that countries are not putting enough effort on this aspect. And so that's key. We found that while technology is there and it can be adapted to different contexts, a lot of groups are not able to adapt these technologies, to adopt them in their production system, especially small and medium landholder farmers. So even though the technologies exist and we have the research centers at the national level and regional levels, then we have a lot of producers that are lagging behind because they are not able to catch up with these technologies. So how can we actually identify and target these groups of farmers, women, indigenous populations, so that they can catch up and use these technologies in an efficient and effective manner? How can we train farmers through giving technical assistance, for instance, how to market products, how to manage their farms more efficiently? So all these things need to be considered, and I think it's important to develop new technologies, but also to think about how can farmers adopt these technologies efficiently and effectively.
Who are the vulnerable people in the region, and where are they in your estimation?
Even within the same countries, we find populations that face a more difficult situation, or they face a higher prevalence of food insecurity. One thing that I have to mention is that women in the region, they have larger food insecurity than men. So they have a higher probability of being food insecure. And the difference is quite large. It's about 6 percentage points. This tells us that we should target policies to support women. We also find that indigenous populations are highly food insecure, and children. So those in terms of the heterogeneity, but as well the different sub-regions. So for instance, the Caribbean is the region within Latin America that has the highest cost of a healthy diet. And so nutritional outcomes come to be the most important issues that need to be taken into consideration when you are designing and implementing policies. In the Southern Cone, these are net food exporting countries, so their challenges are not related with the supply of food, but with certain hotspots of food insecurity, of populations that face food insecurity. So we are talking of very different populations within each country that also need to be considered.
Based on your research, what is your best sort of answer as to why such a large gender gap might exist between men and women when it comes to questions of food and food security?
One of the main causes that we have found is the level of empowerment of women in rural areas. Rural populations are also more food insecure than urban populations in Latin America and the Caribbean. So rural women are the segment of the population that faces high levels of food insecurity. And so what we have found is that the level of empowerment of women in rural areas plays a very important role. So owning land, having access to technology, having trainings, all these different interventions help women to increase their empowerment and then to increase food security, because they have not only the economic resources but also the power within the household to just maintain their food security. When women are more empowered, children are also more food secure, and the household is more food secure. So that's something that we are working on with several projects. We have been able to actually use an index of women's empowerment in agriculture that has been developed by the colleagues at IFPRI. So we're using this tool to measure women's empowerment in agriculture in our projects, and we try to analyze whether the beneficiaries of our projects increase their empowerment after receiving the different interventions that are designed and for this group of the populations.
We've been talking very generally about the big picture challenges facing the region. I'm wondering if we might turn a little bit to some of the work that you do every day at the IDB. And one of those things that you're working on is something called the SELAC Food Security and Nutrition Plan. And I'm wondering if you might talk about this plan, your role in IDB and what you're doing at IDB with respect to that initiative, and your work as well aims to improve food security and nutrition across the hemisphere in the context of this plan.
The Food Security and Nutrition Plan of the CELAC is actually an initiative that was put in place by the 33 countries of the region. And the FAO actually, they are supporting this plan, they designed the plan, and it's already available online. It has very specific activities, indicators, and dimensions that can be put in place or that need to be considered by the countries in order to address these main challenges. In this context, the IDB has been working very closely with the FAO on this. Countries need to identify what are the main challenges that are important for them and how this plan can be actually put together for their specific context. So this is something that we are working with the FAO very closely. We're also working on the platform of food security and nutrition for the Latin American and the Caribbean countries that is going to be launched early next year. It's a governance index for food security, and is to try to precisely support countries to identify how are the institutional arrangements put in place such that they can actually address these issues of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity. So I would say with financing and knowledge and also with technical assistance, we we are doing our best to support the region on these issues.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but I'd like to thank you again so much for sitting down with us and giving us your thoughts based on your expertise about the region and the various challenges, but also opportunities that we face going forward. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me, and a pleasure to be here with you.
This is just one perspective from agriculture and food security experts from across the Western Hemisphere. You can catch our previous interviews for more insights and stay tuned for upcoming episodes as we continue exploring the future of food in the Americas. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.